Well, hello and welcome back to the very latest episode of my Love Machine podcast. Now, today I am very lucky to be joined by a special guest, the wonderful Hayley Copper, who is a breakup, divorce, and separation coach. And she's here to talk to me about all the issues that anyone might face if they have to go through one of those three things. So, Hayley, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me, James.
I'm really pleased to have you. We spoke a little while ago, several months ago originally, and it's taken a long time to get around to this, which is all my fault, but I'm really pleased to have you here. I know a lot has changed for you in the last few months anyway, and you're putting more focus into this. So can you tell me and my listeners a bit about yourself and your background and what made you do this?
Sure. So I went through my own separation just coming up for 3 years ago. And having worked in the field of learning and development in the corporate world, I realised very quickly that I had a lot of skills that I could apply to help people in this environment. I had originally kind of had a very positive kind of breakup, if you can say that. But it was about 9 months in when I hit rock bottom. There was a couple of triggers for that. And I ended up reaching out for some help because as much as kind of I knew about self-development and how to move forward through these difficult times, sometimes you just need somebody else to hold your hand. And so I found myself a divorce coach. And I realised then that this was something that I could pay forward and utilise my skills and give me a much more of a sense of purpose. And I have to say, kind of the progress over the last couple of years has been so rewarding. It's such an honour to work with clients when they're at their most vulnerable and really help them make that shift between kind of heartbroken to moving back towards a happy place. And that's been my experience.
So what does a divorce coach actually do? You start when things are going wrong? Do you start when they actually have divorced or when the process is underway? What do you do?
So I actually have worked with clients either in the run up to kind of an anticipation of a breakup, just to make sure that they're absolutely sure that that's the right thing that they want to do. I've worked with clients in that kind of really raw period when kind of you are crying endlessly hour after hour, day after day. And I've worked with some clients that are just not moving forward and are kind of 6, 9 months, 12 months, even longer down the line. So my work is very flexible based on kind of the exact need of my clients. Once kind of I know kind of where they're at, we explore kind of what's happened for them so far, looking for any kind of particular patterns that have appeared, and then help them kind of like really work to get them clarity on their situation. It's very proactive and action focused to help them identify what they need to do to move on. And I use a number of different techniques, coaching being one of them, obviously, but also NLP techniques, visualizations, just to help them process the emotions and get them moving back to a place where they're happy and back in control of their life.
Do you do this both of them together or just one of the two?
No, I work uniquely just with individuals. So my specialist and my niche is just with individuals, not with couples.
The reason I asked that question is I've been watching a really interesting program at the moment on TV called Couples Therapy. Have you seen that?
I haven't, no.
No, it recommended to me the other day by my brother. What I do coach couples sometimes, but it's not from divorce. It's from what can they do to make things better in their relationship. But it is primarily singles that I work with. But this show is really interesting. It have lots of different couples in America, and they're being going through with the therapist and the way they interact, the way they argue, and some of them separate, some of them divorce, and some of them do stay together. But it's a fascinating program, so I'm wondering if I should expand sometimes into doing a bit more couples work before it even gets to that stage. But this is about you. This is about people that are choosing to divorce, people that have broken up, and people that have separated. So there are different stages of this, aren't there, when they do first experience? Can you talk me through the stage of someone who's newly about to go through the divorce process, maybe, or maybe they've just completed it and they feel a bit lost? What sort of thoughts
Yeah.
do they have?
So typically, I mean, kind of dependent on where a client's at and as to why the reason that they've separated will depend on exactly kind of where they're at. In my situation, I'd actually made a decision to end my 15-year relationship, and that took a lot of soul searching in order to be able to get to that place because I have a young son as well. And obviously, you go through all of the feelings of like guilt and selfishness. Whereas sometimes, like my clients that are coming to me because maybe there's been betrayal and cheating involved, the mindset is actually kind of can be very different. So we tend to take them on a journey to help them kind of explore the change curve. So it's the Kubler-Ross kind of process, whereby so you go into, like if you've gone into the change process, there's a lot of shock, there can be anger, it can lead you to spiral down into like a real depth of depression, which is where I described kind of my rock bottom experience, to then help kind of somebody establish that once you've hit rock bottom, that there is a way out of this. And I really like to reaffirm with clients that I'm working with that whilst they're kind of feeling a certain way right now, it's not always going to be that way. And actually, I'm on a mission to help people see that these breakups, divorce or separation, whatever it might be, can actually be like a real life affirming and life changing moment, so that you can move from this black hole into actually exploring a blank canvas and really redesign your life to make you feel really happy and fulfilled again.
That's great. I think just because you're divorced or separated doesn't need to define you or to mean what your future pattern. It could be at this whole start of a new adventure for you. And people come to me with that from my coaching all the time, from what I do. But what are the most common reasons people do decide to have a divorce or a breakup?
The typical reasons are normally kind of that there's bad relationships that have been because they're not spending enough time together. There's no longer a connection with one another. Obviously, there's the obvious if somebody has cheated. And I think sometimes it's just like a breakdown in communication where you lose that connection that you have with somebody. I had the experience where kind of it was all hearts and flowers when we first got together, and I really thought that that was going to be forever. But actually, over time, we just grew apart. And we grew to that point where kind of neither of us were growing. And there was lots of compromise on kind of how we were actually progressing. And for me personally, that made me feel stifled as somebody who loves to learn, loves to try new things, and has got an adventurous streak. Then kind of for me, that was something that I wanted to continue to see in my life, and that wasn't happening. And from that point of view, kind of it was something that I decided was actually kind of making me ill at that time. So I wanted to make sure that kind of I did put myself first in that situation in order to be able to move forward and get back to living a life that I was really happy to enjoy. And I see that a lot in my clients as well. Quite often they lose that sense of self. Their self-esteem, their confidence really hits rock's bottom because of the changes that have kind of crept in over time. Quite often I describe that to my clients as death by 1,000 cuts. It might be lots of little things. If there's not been a big event such as kind of the betrayal or cheating, but this death by 1,000 little cuts that can quite often take you off course and end up to a point where there's a huge amount of resentment between one another. And I find that quite commonly happens in relationships where kind of you've become parents as well over time.
Do you think when it gets to that stage, it is beyond hope, or are there ways you can try and fix that?
I think I'm definitely not kind of pro-divorce, so kind of I want to put that out there because I very much would like to see people continue to live a happy life, which is one of the tools and techniques that we use really just to explore to make sure that there are no regrets and that this is something that they want, because it is not necessarily for everybody. You know, it's important to really just focus on what's crucial for you in the relationship. I do believe that there can be a way back, and sometimes kind of that is just about reconnecting with one another to find that path forward, to reconnect and find the things that you love. So spending time with one another, making time for date nights as well, and really giving each other quality time, or looking at your love languages so that you can connect with one another on a deeper level, and have that intimacy as well, which can quite often go missing out of a relationship. But sometimes kind of if there isn't enough there to reconnect, if there's a lot of resentment that's built up, I kind of look at a resentment scale on a scale of 1 to 10. If you've got resentment against your partner, that's probably around a 7 or an 8. That can be really difficult to come back from, really, really difficult, because so much kind of negativity is built up between the two of you.
I think quite often, I say this quite a lot on my podcast, that one of the reasons couples do struggle is when children come along. Because you stop being the priority and things, it's hard to go out on date nights. And I always recommend date nights. You should never stop dating if you're married, if you're in a couple, whatever it might be, never stop dating. But it's easier said than done, particularly during the pandemic in particular, because people haven't been able to escape each other or to go out and do exciting things away from their children or even on their own. Do you think that has led to a big problem with people getting divorced now? Now things are calmer?
I definitely think that the pandemic has had an impact on people's relationships. I've certainly seen an increase in demand for our services. And as a result from that, it's because almost you've got this pressure cooker where we were at home, we were potentially isolating, or just that we didn't have that sense of freedom to go off and do the things that we enjoy. You're forced into this kind of pressure cooker of spending time with somebody who maybe you have grown apart from. When you are kind of a parent outside of the pandemic as well, kind of that can, like you say, be very difficult to spend that quality time with somebody. So as a result from that, it is trying to carve out and get creative with different ways that you can approach that theory, with it not necessarily being about lots of money to go to fancy restaurants or kind of out for drinks to bars, but actually trying to recreate that time and space, maybe booking a babysitter in order to be able to have that one-on-one time with one another. But both of you've got to want it. And I think sometimes kind of I've got to the conversations with my clients and there's just been no interest from kind of the partner to want to actually pursue this. And again, that might be from the other person's perspective, that they've just kind of tuned out and they don't have that desire to work at the relationship any longer.
Is that often the case, or is it just a case of denial when they think nothing's wrong, there's no need to talk about this? I think men tend to do that quite a lot. What do you think?
I think it's a really interesting question, if I'm honest. I think that quite often in my experience that there is denial there, and it's probably because it's going to uncover something that's more deeply rooted. The reason kind of why somebody's feeling kind of insecure, maybe kind of that they felt triggered, certain things have come up. And I think that the scary thing is people tend to bury their head in the sand and pretend that nothing is wrong. And therefore kind of they'll carry on. We kind of mask how we're feeling. Everything looks great to the outside world because we want to carry on that pretense in some ways, because actually the opposite of that is having those really difficult conversations with your partner. It's about kind of really getting vulnerable, being raw and exposing kind of, you know, your most vulnerable self, and knowing that that could end in rejection from that person. I quite often hear kind of with clients that I work with that there's lip service to say that the other person wants to do the work, but when it comes down to it, they won't commit to it. And I think much like kind of we keep ourselves busy because it stops us from actually tuning into ourselves and kind of that inner voice that tells us exactly what's wrong or what we need to be working on. And when you're put in that situation to do this kind of work, it can quite often unearth those things that maybe kind of we've buried from back in the past, you know, that have triggered us or given us those insecurities in the first place. People just don't want to rip that plaster off.
Well, it's a painful thing to do, isn't it? And I think even when people do separate or divorce, they often feel that they failed and they're worried about being judged by other people. So how would you deal with that?
I like to work with my clients on the basis to actually kind of like put things into a sense of reality. So we try and explore kind of all of the angst that we've got, kind of those feelings that come up, and to acknowledge them so that it's not something that we hold on to. I'm very kind of pro journaling. So kind of when you've separated in a relationship, that typically you're spending a lot of time on your own, and actually if you haven't got that person to speak to, then that's something that you can use as an outlet to actually get a lot of those thoughts and feelings out in the open. But actually carrying kind of that guilt or that shame around the fact that your relationship has broken down, I work with my clients to put it into a real reality perspective. You know, this is something that does happen commonly. It's not kind of necessarily kind of a fault that sits with one particular person always. There's no shame in it. It's so common these days. And I don't think that it is selfish to be able to put yourself first, because quite often that there are mental health issues that can be attached to this kind of like breakdown, where people are suppressing a lot of who they are and how they're feeling about themselves, that actually causes other issues in the relationship, which brings people to close down.
I laughed when you mentioned the word journaling a few minutes ago, because that has become a running joke in my podcast, because every single coach says to me, you ought to do journaling and it's so important. And I've even had journaling coaches on here and apps that do this. And for those that are listening, I've got to mention this because I can't stop myself. I've got my journal here, which has still only got 2 pages filled in after 6 months. And that's it. That's my journal. So I just can't. I really want to journal for my own future goals, but I can never get round to it. I can never bring myself to do it. And people might say, well, okay, that's not for you, but it's something I want to do. Any advice generally you can give me Slightly off topic here, to do with journaling.
Sure.
Yeah.
It isn't for everybody. So kind of, it's like if you've got a desire to do it, then lean into it, obviously, as you're trying to. I think for me, kind of the success in journaling comes, I look at it in two different forms. So free form journaling, where you're just literally emptying kind of your head onto the page. I find that really, really useful if I've got reoccurring thoughts and I know that kind of I've got loops of things that I want to do or thoughts and feelings that I'm having that I'm continuous. So I refer to those as kind of that vicious cycle, the hamster wheel questions that just turn over and over again. When kind of I use it for that, quite often kind of with free flow, kind of just letting yourself go and continually writing until kind of your pen stops, it just enables you to kind of capture that stream of consciousness that's busy in your mind. And I quite often refer to that as your brain being a bit like a computer. There's only how much storage it can have. So, and we know kind of how rubbish our phones or our computers can be when the storage kind of hits its limit, it starts to malfunction. And our brains are exactly the same. So by having that download into the journal frees up some of that mind space to actually be able to process what we need to in order to apply it. But it can also work with kind of key questions that you want answered for yourself by kind of like posing, finding some prompts and working through those.
That's my trouble, really. I have so much going on in my brain at any one time. I'm holding all my clients in there and all the things I have to do with them, working on them, excited for them. And my own life and the things that get in the way. My car needs to be looked after. My shopping's coming. All these little things come into my brain. So when I try and do journaling, it's just, there's so much of it, I just can't get it out. It just stays in my head. I've got a virtual reality headset and I've got a meditation app on there, which I want to do every day and I enjoy it. But when I'm doing it, my mind is ticking over. But that's just me. And I think people experience this as well when they are going through the same journey as going for a breakup or looking for someone new. Because they just don't know what to do or where to turn, do they? They just confusion.
No.
So I can see why it's really useful for someone who's going through that to journal and to write things down.
Yeah.
Because quite often they haven't got the support circle that they need. And I guess that's where you come in, isn't it?
Yeah, so I work with my clients to help them identify kind of their breakup support team. Obviously, kind of if there's a divorce involved, then kind of we'll look at like legal situations, so kind of their legal support with a solicitor. If it can be quite complex from finances, if tangled, then financial advisors. But you want somebody who's going to be your breakup buddy. So whether or not that is a friend who you can talk to if you kind of aren't able to work with a coach. But it's also important to make sure that you find the right friend because you've got a friend who's got your best interests at heart that doesn't necessarily completely hate all over the ex, because otherwise that advice can be quite biased. You know, we're thinking about cutting their clothes up, dumping them in the bin bags outside the house, all of that kind of stuff. Whereas if you've got an exercise buddy as well, it's really great. But a divorce coach is a perfect person to have in your breakup support team because this gives you the opportunity of somebody really objective. I do explore the background of the relationship kind of in our first call that we have together so that I know the background. I can look and identify some of the red flags and agree what the priorities are that we need to work on. And then we work on it in a very proactive fashion, very objective from my aspect as well, because I don't have any connections with kind of either of the parties prior to that, so I don't necessarily take sides. So I present kind of a very objective view. We're able then to work through, and a coach can ask you the difficult questions that maybe a friend wouldn't, and get you to pause and reflect. And that's really where you get that opportunity to have those breakthroughs, really kind of like digging into the depth and the root of the problem to actually help them understand kind of where it's coming from. And quite often you'll find that kind of what we think was the problem is actually kind of something entirely different.
It's quite a powerful thing to do because you're able to open up to someone that you know, hopefully, won't be in your life indefinitely. So you can,
Yes.
almost like journaling, you can get it all out there and you can just leave it there and it's done. And you know you can get the support on it because it's not permanent. But breakups themselves, they aren't always total breakups, are they? For example, if you've got a child, that person is still going to be part of your life forever after that point. So how do you manage that if you're quite hurt?
And that's one of the difficult situations that you find because you can't have that clean break if you've got that relationship still kind of like through your child. And depending on the circumstances of your relationship and the breakup itself will really depend on how you're able to support that person going forward or build a relationship with them. you know, in situations where kind of maybe there's been domestic abuse or toxic relationships, kind of narcissistic tendencies, that's a really difficult situation and very specialist to work on. But actually by working kind of with my clients that are kind of outside of some of those scenarios, it's about really clearly defining kind of what their boundaries are, what their values are, what's important to them the most, and actually not giving so much power over kind of to the other partner in order to be able to have somebody else dictate those situations. So I explore with clients kind of the principles of co-parenting. Quite often, if there have been kind of a difficult relationship, and normally kind of in the outskirts of kind of, or the immediacy of a relationship breakdown, because there's that resentment, that anger that resides kind of between the two people, you can quite often end up kind of working towards kind of a parallel parenting relationship where, you know, there's one rule in one house and one rule in the other, because you can't physically put that element of control and dictate what happens in the other house. So you drive yourself completely insane by doing that. So I work with kind of my clients to help understand kind of how they can best parent in partnership in some way, shape or form with the ex. I like to see kind of over time that with my clients, the number of them have actually gone on them because they've been able to build their self-esteem, their confidence in kind of their own voice, that they've built a relationship kind of further down the line where they then have like an open relationship with their ex, so that they can have that open communication and put the child first. And that's really important to work towards. But I appreciate that it's not always possible in every kind of relationship.
No, but I think it is important to remember the child always does come first. And if you've got that mentality,
Absolutely.
then whatever you're doing is for the purpose of that. If you agree to get on, even just in front of the child, that's important. Do you work mainly with women or men and women equally?
When I first started out in this work, I really thought it was just going to be women. But interestingly enough, kind of my first 3 or 4 clients actually were all guys. And I found that quite surprising, given that, you know, the stereotype that like guys don't necessarily want to talk about their feelings, but I found the opposite to be true. Some of the clients that I've worked with, and there's like I've probably got about 50-50 client base between men and women. Some of the most hurt and upset clients have been those guys, you know, where they can't see a way forward, where they've been so in love with their partner, and you know that they're absolutely devastated that they've been in that situation.
That doesn't really surprise me. I think it's because a lot of men haven't got anyone else to talk to. So they're not really sure what to do. Women tend to have their family and social circle. But it's a bigger rejection to a guy sometimes if he feels that he's failed. He doesn't want to tell his friends about it. It's not the manly thing to do, is it? To sort of cry to the nearby guy. So I can see why there is a big demand for men as well. And coaching itself, women tend to be the ones that go for that. But in this situation, I can absolutely see. And getting the female opinion would definitely help when it comes to that. So I can understand
Yeah.
that. Now,
And I find that they do tend to have kind of quite a positive reaction to the practical nature of coaching, because it's very focused on taking actions, putting things in place, kind of, and being able to make a difference in terms of the way that they're moving forward by identifying what needs to be done. And I think sometimes that is can be lacking in that relationship where they've kind of never been in that situation before and don't really know their way out.
so how do you move on? And how long should you give it before you start thinking about dating again?
How long's a piece of string? Some people want to jump straight back in again because, you know, maybe they're not very good about being on their own. Maybe they have some attachment issues, kind of, and therefore kind of the pain of being on their own, much like I mentioned earlier on, opens up that whole too much time alone, too much time with my thoughts, not really kind of prepared to kind of go inside and understand what's happened. For me personally, it took me almost 12 months to dip my toe back in the water, and that was with some encouragement from kind of various people around me, younger friends that I had kind of in the workplace, as well as the work that I was doing with my divorce coach at the time. So, you know, it really just depends, but I've got clients, as I say, that have wanted to get back on the horse straight away, and others that 2 or 3 years down the line, they're still not interested in necessarily exploring that.
Is that through fear or just not interested?
I believe it's probably through fear. I think like if you have come through kind of a big breakup, particularly if it's been an important and a long-term relationship, and quite complex as a breakup as well, particularly where betrayal has been involved, then to have that confidence in yourself, kind of like fear of not being good enough, not being kind of the right shape, the right person, kind of kind of modern enough, kind of fun enough. All of those sorts of factors come into it. And I actually kind of work with clients to then identify, get them into a good place by working on their self-esteem and their confidence. But then kind of we start to roll forward into the work to identify, okay, so what would you want in a relationship? But also, most importantly, what don't you want? So it's like a reverse shopping list, kind of making sure that you've identified the things that you absolutely don't want. And typically they can sometimes be characteristics, obviously, of their ex or kind of situations that have come up in there. So it might be to do with like the personality type of somebody, or it could be interests and hobbies that they might have that just kind of haven't worked out in the past as kind of and have taken time away from the relationship. But once we identify that, then we start to get a little bit more familiar around what it is that we want in our life, and that we can start to then manifest kind of what it is that is interesting to us. The more kind of we can visualize around kind of the reality of that, then we can start to imagine our life with that person going forward. And that's all part of the designing the new life. So going from this black hole of like rock bottom to this blank canvas that I talked about earlier on. So it's all about kind of putting color on that canvas to help you see what that life might be like in the future.
That's great. I think a lot of it is just not being sure what to do and how to go about things, and feeling that you're not enough and feeling you're out of practice. So like anything, just getting started with the help of a coach always can help you do that, because you're going to hold your hand on the way. It's not as daunting as you think it might be. And sometimes people wait for years and years and years, and that's too long. I think you're just wasting time. If you do want to be with someone and you have that desire, then it doesn't matter if it's 3 months or 3 years. Just get yourself out there and do something about it. And I think it does take 12 months, and it can take more than that for certain people. If you do it too quickly, you might end up making the same mistakes that you made before. You haven't learned from it. So it's you need a chance for reflection, don't you? To look back and think,
Definitely.
well, this has gone wrong, and to work on this. And like you said, to think about what you want and then what you don't want moving forwards. And I think it's great that you've been through all this yourself, because it makes you very qualified to help people. So what when you started dating again, you started doing this, how did you start? Did you use the apps? What did you do?
Yeah, I really didn't know where to start from. So when the apps first started, you wonder how old I was, like years and years ago. I dabbled. I didn't meet anybody through that way, but I've got a friend who met her husband like way back when the apps first appeared, and they're very happily married. Whereas kind of this time around, I kind of thought I knew what to expect with the apps, but boy, was I in for kind of an interesting ride. It was a whole new ball game. The online dating thing was completely different from the experience that I had back then. And I think it just has been quite a process of trial and error. Kind of starting out there, looking at the different apps, trying kind of a few of them to find out which one suits you and kind of your personality the most. What is enough to share, what's too little to share, what are the right photos to put on there, how to present yourself. But I think kind of for me, one of the things that was really important to me, and that kind of through my experience of my breakup, was just to put forward myself in a genuine way. Because at the end of the day, if you meet somebody, they're going to get to know you. Your mask is going to slip at some stage if you're pretending to be something that you're not. So for me, it's always been about a decision to be really authentic in the way that I present myself. So I needed to make sure that I was honest. Maybe not everybody is honest on their profiles, as kind of we know, and certainly it's in the news a lot at the moment with the new Netflix series.
Have you watched that?
No, but it's definitely on play for tonight.
I saw it last night, and I was thinking, goodness me. And that's a whole podcast I might have to do on my own, just to talk about that documentary, The Tinder Swindler. So many thoughts, so much bad advice in that program from the people that were single. But that's something else. This is what I do. This is where my job comes into it. I help people get dates and to use these apps successfully. But you're right, things have changed a lot in the last few years. Online dating was a bit more serious, but now the apps have come along and they've shortcutted everything. And they're great, they can provide a tool, but the quality of people on there and the level that they engage is different to how it used to be, like you said. So can I ask, are you single now? Are you dating someone?
So I am single now. Over kind of the past couple of years, I've had a couple of short-term kind of friendships, relationships, however you want to refer to them. One was virtually, or almost virtually, kind of virtual during the pandemic, and went on, and we could see kind of as things started to open up again, it wasn't going to work out that in that way. Which was great because we were able to support each other kind of through that initial period of lockdown, kind of when no one really knew what was going on. So there was a huge amount of value, but I also learned a lot about myself and what I wanted during that time in that relationship. And then I've had another 6-month relationship kind of in the past 12 months. And we still remain really, really good friends and support one another. So there's a great chemistry there, but it's not just the right fit. And I'm a true believer that the longer that you stay kind of connected in something that maybe not 100% right for you, then it stops you from progressing to something that is right for you. Yeah. So for me, that's kind of where kind of I had to make that decision, and it was a difficult decision, but I've met, you know, a great friend out of it. You know, and so this is like a really nice way of being able to not just kind of meet somebody that there might be the romantic ideal and kind of the relationship that you want, but also just to meet some new and interesting people. And that tends to be how I approach it at this moment in time. I think the thing that petrified me and petrifies a lot of people about getting back into the dating world is, oh my God, it's got to be right, and I've got to find Mr. Right next, and, you know, kind of that sense of pressure and urgency that you face on it, rather than I was just looking to meet some really interesting people. If we clicked, great, you know, kind of I'd spend time with them, but actually kind of if we didn't, then it would be like on to the next, but in a respectful fashion. And that's something that was really important to me. And luckily enough, you know, you mentioned earlier on, you know, there's a lot of people out there, communication's not always great. I think kind of in my experience, I'd probably said, like, whilst I was really flattered by the amount of attention I got when I first went onto the apps, the reality of that kind of boiled down to maybe like 1% to 2% of them would probably be somebody that I would want to spend any time with or have, you know, a quality conversation with. So I try not to get disheartened.
They are just a tool, and I think if you are newly single, or even if you've been single for some time, don't rush into anything. Just do all you can. Give the apps a go. Go out there in the real world, go to events, accept every invitation that comes your way, but take things slowly. There's no need to rush into anything because you're enough on your own, and you've realised that hopefully in that time. So you've got new adventures, and I do honestly believe it's a very positive time for dating now, and people are looking much more seriously. I've been saying that for 2 years, but it's become increasingly so. I've never been so busy as in the last 2 years, and there's hope. And I don't want to say that I hope you are busy, because that sounds sad, because all these people are getting divorced, but they coming to you, that's a good thing. It's positivity, because you're breaking them, so you're taking them through that into a new journey and new adventures to help them realise that they can have a much happier, better life than they had before. And that's the joy that you bring people. So if someone wants to find out more about you, Hayley, how would they do that?
So you can find me on Instagram at Heart to Heart with Hayley. And I also have a website by the same name at hearttoheartwithhayley.com. I have a Facebook page as well by the same name, just to make it easy for everybody. And I'm always open to kind of having conversations with people that are interested about, you know, where they're at in their relationship and whether or not kind of they want to move forward, what's right for them. So I offer a free discovery call for 15-20 minutes just to help explore with anybody who might be interested in seeking kind of support from myself as a divorce coach. And the title kind of divorce coach doesn't mean that you need to be married. It can be kind of, I think kind of I've worked with clients that have come out of relationships that have been only like 18 months to 2 years, but they've been really meaningful in that time to them. And other clients that kind of have been in a relationship for 25-30 years, and obviously we'll have very different needs. So if you need to talk and you want to move on from where you are and get unstuck, then I'm your girl.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hayley. You've been excellent. I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye for now.
Thanks, James. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to give you a free copy of my latest book, which you can download right now from my website, jamespreece.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the love by taking a few seconds to write a positive review on the iTunes store right now. See you next time.